The following is a production of the University of Minnesota, driven to discover.
Well, hi, this is David Arundel, your host for the Equity Outcomes Podcast. Thanks for spending some time with me today. In this podcast episode, we feature an updated publication from the early 1990s entitled Foundational Themes and Theories for Supplemental Instruction. Much has changed since then. New theories have emerged and built upon the older ones. One of the enduring components of this publication is the comparison of the two models for treating people, the medical model and the public health model. Dr. Robert Blanc, one of the key people involved with developing SI in the early days, should be credited with that metaphor. It was really meaningful and helped to make sense out of how SI had a different approach. Once again, some of my family as synthetic voices will provide the narration of the publication. Felicia will be the primary narrator with Donald asking questions. Leslie and Matthew will read the direct quotations by the educators. I hope you have an informative and pleasant listening experience. In addition to this audio episode, I also provide a transcript of this narration. Well, let's listen to Felicia as she begins the narration of the foundational theories for the supplemental instruction model.
Foundation and Theoretical Framework for Supplemental Instruction by David R. Arundel. The supplemental instruction from the beginning was based upon educational theories that informed best practices to help students become independent learners who could be successful in college and life. We are deeply indebted to their guidance with the continued improvement of the SI model for meeting student needs. This particular document identifies what influenced SI when it was created. Over the past 5 decades, new educational theories have informed the practice and made the model even more responsive. They are not represented in this particular document. The intention is to go back to the infancy of SI and what influenced it then, not what is guiding it now. With that historical context established, these theories and the educators that developed them are still useful.
How is this document organized so I can understand these complex theories?
The document begins with a long section comparing the prevailing approach of providing academic assistance and then the new model that the SI model used to influence it. The rest of the document are a series of theories and pedagogies that guided the model's development. First, the theory of Constructivism is explored through 2 of the leaders for its development, Piaget, Vygotsky, and Dale. Next we explored Dr. Vincent Tinto's theory for student departure and how the SI model helps to address nearly every factor that influences students to drop out. Then we explore a model for organizing academic support within the institution by Dr. Ruth Kiemig. SI is heavily built upon the work of Dr. Claire Weinstein regarding student development of their metacognition skills. SI sessions are not about just getting students to memorize the class lectures. It is about getting students to think about their thinking. Getting them to be selective about which learning activities to use for a particular academic task. We conclude the article by examining collaborative learning, part of the heart of good SI sessions when strategies are used to encourage all students to be engaged and active learners. As said earlier, many new theories have been added to these, but the ones in this document were the ones relied upon at the infancy of the SI model when it was developed at UMKC.
Let's start at the beginning. What were the 2 different approaches to meeting the academic needs of students?
Traditional individual tutorial practices may be described as following a medical model. An individual is identified as needing professional assistance on the basis of number 1, prior history and diagnostic testing. Number 2, self-referral in response to perceived symptoms, or number 3, referral by another professional in response to observed symptoms. In some institutions, identification of high-risk students is based primarily on prior history of test scores like number 1 above. These tertiary institutions are likely to be somewhat selective, requiring students to submit to extensive pre-matriculation testing and interviews. Professional schools and private, selective colleges are among those fitting this category. Students entering such institutions typically commit for the long term and, at a minimum, can be expected to persist for at least a year. Under these circumstances, academic therapy with students at risk can begin immediately upon matriculation and can continue until students give evidence of being able to function independently in the academic environment. As noted in approach number 2 previously mentioned, some students self-refer. Their symptoms in these instances may range from free-floating anxiety in the academic setting to unsatisfactory performance in one or more highly specific settings. The tutor or resource specialist must function first as diagnostician, identifying the basis for the student's self-referral and differentiating between anxiety and a variety of other reasons for unsatisfactory performance. Having established at least a tentative diagnosis, the tutor then becomes the therapist, helping the student to negotiate the academic demands of the institution. Use of approach number 3 mentioned previously requires another professional, usually a professor or graduate teaching assistant, to become aware that a student is in academic difficulty. This awareness may come in a variety of ways, most likely in the wake of unsuccessful performance on an academic task. For example, the faculty member may refer the student for tutorial assistance to correct an academic problem that has become apparent because of a low test score. In this instance, the tutor functions, as described in the previous paragraph, first as a diagnostician and then as a therapist.
Why was this medical model no longer relevant or useful for helping students at UMKC?
It was in a milieu dominated by tutorial services in the medical model that SI developed. The developers at UMKC found that several assumptions of the medical model either did not apply or were not practiced in their institution. Subsequent adoption of SI on other campuses may suggest that the same assumptions were found wanting on these other campuses as well. As noted, the traditional model relies on identification of the high-risk student, the student who is deemed to be deficient or at risk in some way. In institutions other than those described such as selective tertiary and professional schools, several factors preclude such pre-matriculation identification. First, entering students must be known to the faculty and staff in time for key personnel to establish contact with at-risk students. Second, it must be noted in this context that neither prior performance nor standardized testing is sufficiently reliable as a prediction criterion of who is and is not at risk. As many as 50% of those whose prior scores suggest they are at risk prove to be successful without intervention, and many of those who are not identified in this manner prove to be unsuccessful. Analysis of high school grades and standardized college entrance examinations do not identify all students who will drop out of college for academic reasons, and attrition cannot be addressed effectively by providing help only to those students who show either symptoms or predisposing weaknesses. The treatment must be more generalized, and the problem must be addressed at or near its source: the mismatch between the level of instruction and the level of student preparation. This was a key foundation for the SI approach to serving the needs of students and the faculty who teach the challenging courses. Timely identification of students who are at risk is difficult in the traditional model. Faculty who can refer students for corrective instruction are rarely able to make a referral before the scoring of the first course examination. Students who are referred after that time are a considerable disadvantage, trying to catch up with the class after a very poor start. The rate of student attrition across courses is greatest in the first 6 weeks or after the first exam, when students may find their grades disappointing. Students who are at risk are among those least compliant with faculty recommendations for special help, whether for personal counseling or for academic assistance. Such students often perceive that tutorial help, far from relieving them of their academic burden, increases the burden, as they must now answer to a tutor in addition to the course professor. Finally, students who are at risk are notorious for their reluctance to refer themselves for assistance until much too late. Whether through denial, pride, or ignorance, students who need help the most are least likely to request it. So goes the axiom of the learning assistance trade.
What was the new approach that was developed at UMKC to do better than the medical model?
The medical model has already been described, in which it attempts to work with people one by one who have symptoms of being sick. However, this model can quickly be overwhelmed by many people needing individual help or not treating everyone who is sick within the community. There is another method for meeting the health needs of people, and that is the public health model. In this model, help is provided by preventing illness to begin. The best example was ensuring that drinking water was safe in communities in the late 1800s. A host of illnesses can be prevented if public health laws ensured clean water, clean food in the grocery stores, and the like. The drive for school children to have their vaccine shots helps to stop the spread of diseases that could strike many within the community. At UMKC, we needed an academic support model that could meet the needs of many students and reach them before they suffered academic failure that could influence them to drop out of college. We needed a public health model.
That is an interesting analogy.
SI first developed in an institution that did not fit into the medical model described. At UMKC, students can register as late as the first day of class, with their prior transcripts and test score data to be submitted sometime before the beginning of the following semester. This large, inner-city, commuter institution typically turned over 40% of its students each semester, most of them due to transfer but some due to the phenomenon now known as stopping out, as distinguished from dropping out. Stopping out referred to the widespread practice of taking no classes during a semester that would be devoted to other priorities, such as working to re-establish a bankroll sufficient to allow subsequent re-entry. Delivery of services from the first day of class changes the support program from a reactive to a proactive mode. One of the non-cognitive variables that differentiates between more capable and less capable students is this. Those who are less capable are inclined to do without support services until they need them. Those who are more capable will avail themselves of services at the beginning and stop services if they find the services to be neither productive nor essential. The presence of these more capable students in support sessions affirms that the sessions are not remedial. That fact enables less capable students to participate without the fear of stigma. The integration of skills and content allows the SI leader to meet the perceived content needs of students while delivering essential skills instruction simultaneously. If, as McLuhan argued, the medium is the message, then the message of SI is skill instruction and practice, delivered along with the course content material. These are seamlessly blended together. Delivering services on an outreach basis, in the classroom buildings assigned for regular academic instruction, lends an air of academic credibility to the support service. Similarly, the overt endorsement of the SI program from the participating course professor lends further authority to the claim that SI is valuable. Of course, the voluntary nature of the SI Pact, which is renewable every week, or every day, for that matter, comforts the wary student who shuns taking on additional responsibility. The combination of voluntary participation, early intervention, and proactive support differentiates the SI model from the traditional medical model that relies on diagnosis of signs and symptoms followed by prescriptive treatment.
Now that I understand the choice for a public health model approach to academic assistance, what will be the educational theories that will guide it to sound practice?
This publication briefly describes some theorists and researchers whose work the SI developers found particularly helpful. A conscious decision was made to base the SI model on a developmental perspective because that perspective puts the burden of responsibility on the service providers. Such a theory base assumes that the students will learn if the conditions for learning are in place. The leading researcher in the developmental field at the time the SI model was created was Jean Piaget. Robert Blanc is to be credited with anchoring SI in a developmental framework and designing original research studies.
Tell me more about constructivism.
Jean Piaget formulated a comprehensive model of cognitive development. Although Piaget studiously avoided prescriptive statements concerning education, preferring to confine his studies to epistemology, several of those with whom he worked have applied his insight to education. The conclusion of this line of research as it applied to SI is this. Many students in tertiary educational institutions have not yet developed abstract reasoning that will allow them to learn new ideas simply by listening to lectures and reading text. In recent years, some of Piaget's ideas have been formalized into an educational theory called Constructivism. Proponents of constructivism take their name from Piaget's observation that students must construct their own knowledge to be able to understand and use it. Piaget believed, quote,
"The principal goal of education in the schools should be creating men and women who are capable of doing new things, not simply repeating what other generations have done, men and women who are creative, inventive and discoverers, who can be critical and verify, and not accept everything they are offered."
Many constructivists make a clear distinction between information and knowledge. Information is easily transmitted through telling. On the other hand, gaining knowledge means gaining expertise. Learners must be actively involved in constructing the knowledge themselves and understand how to use it. In 1988, Blaise stated that telling students actually perpetuates remedial processing tendencies that many students possess. Good SI sessions model thinking behavior that cause participants to engage the material such as lecture notes, textbook, outside readings and construct knowledge, and not just review the information. Students typically perceive their need as entirely content-centered. Experience shows, however, that the most common need among marginal students is for the learning and thinking skills that are basic to content mastery. In a publication from 1976, Arones and Karplus observed that 50% of entering college first-year students did not have reasoning skills at the formal, or abstract, operational level described by Piaget and Inhelder. The popular and professional literature has not reported improvement since these early studies. Students who appear to operate at the concrete or non-abstract level consistently have difficulty processing unfamiliar information when it is presented through the abstract mediums of lecture and text. Their questions about material are often detail-oriented and superficial. Rarely do they ask or answer questions that require inference, synthesis, or application. They can operate at more advanced levels once they have mastered a concept, but, to do so, they require regular instruction that either anchors the concept directly in their previous experience or provides a concrete experience with data from which the concept may be inferred. A variety of tasks can present overwhelming obstacles to individuals who have not attained the advanced stage of intellectual maturity that Piaget and Inhelder identified as formal or abstract. This problem is complicated in foundation courses where the most common means of assessment is detail-oriented exams, which, by their design, reinforce rote memory. It is, therefore, possible for students both to achieve high marks in courses and to fail to understand the principal concepts that must be assimilated if they are to retain and use the memorized material. The effect of these differences in learning patterns surfaces in more advanced courses that require students to display integration and application of the knowledge they have previously acquired.
Who else was influential within constructivism?
Another leader in the constructivist movement was Lev S. Vygotsky. He created a concept called the zone of proximal development. This zone was the gap between where a learner can operate independently and the higher level that the learner could operate at if they were interacting with more capable peers. Through continued practice, the learners increase their capability to think since they are being encouraged by the more capable peers to extend themselves to higher levels of thought. Vygotsky states that, quote,
"By giving our students practice in talking with others, we give them frames for thinking on their own. Learning is more than the acquisition of the ability to think, It is the acquisition of many specialized abilities for thinking about a variety of things. It is through others that we become ourselves.
One task of the SI leader is to guide students as they raise their operational levels. Specifically, SI leaders focus on intellectual tasks such as the identification and control of variables, a reasoning skill common to both the natural and social sciences as well as mathematics. Similarly, SI leaders focus on helping students to recognize proportional relationships and to use ratio reasoning when it is appropriate to do so. Although students can use hypothetical, deductive reasoning on an informal or intuitive level, they often need help to see the relevance of this kind of thinking in a formal academic discipline. Application of the idea of probability, on the other hand, often escapes students unless direct attention is drawn to it. A task of the SI leader is to make explicit the instances in which the aforementioned reasoning patterns and processes are implicit in either lecture or text. The SI leader functions in another key role to help students attain academic maturity. The leader helps students to analyze their own learning. This metacognitive approach to learning finds application in its most basic form when the SI leader helps students to figure out what they do and do not understand about a concept and then to frame questions that eventually will lead to their more thorough understanding. Skilled and experienced learners know how to judge their own understanding and to ask such questions. Less successful learners often fail to distinguish between what they do and do not understand. SI leaders, then, must be sensitive to levels of student development and performance across a wide spectrum. Some constructivists see collaborative peer group learning activities as preparing learners to become independent in the future. Consistent with this goal, SI encourages similar development since SI sessions, SI leaders, or even other forms of collaborative learning groups may not be available in the future. It is development in this dimension that we believe helps to explain why there are long-term benefits to SI participation, i.e., increased re-enrollment and graduation rates.
How did Edgar Dale's cone of experience fit in with constructivism?
Compatible with Piaget's theory base is Edgar Dale's cone of experience, which conveys some of Piaget's ideas on learning in a graphic form. Proven useful for working with students in lower grades, this model is also relevant for working with college-aged students. Dale proposes that learning is stimulated progressively from concrete or hands-on experiences to abstract or verbal and visual symbols. The foundations for instruction reside in direct sensory experiences combined with purposeful interaction with the stimuli sources. Dale's cone is most useful as a guide for introducing and building concepts. At the most basic and most effective level of instruction, students are introduced to new material through an actual hands-on experience or doing the real thing. Students see, do, and talk about the concept. Learning is the most complete if these conditions can be met. At the top of the cone, or triangle, is lecture and text. Dale's model suggests that these passive instructional modes are the least effective ways to introduce new concepts to students. Between the top and the bottom of the cone, Dale has several other levels of instruction, including giving a talk, watching a demonstration, seeing a film or picture. For SI leaders, experience with Dale's cone helps them design the instructional activities to meet student needs.
Vincent Tinto's model of student retention is one of the most heavily cited pieces of research in education. How does it fit in with the story of supplemental instruction?
Tinto's research suggests that students who are integrated into both the academic and social dimensions of the institution are more likely to persist. Institutions bear part of the responsibility for student success, since the decision to leave an institution is more a function of what occurs during the college experience rather than with what preceded it. Tinto stated in his landmark book, first published in 1987, quote,
Drawn from the work of Durkheim and Van Gennep, this theory will argue that colleges and universities are like other human communities, that student departure necessarily reflects both the attributes and actions of the individual and those of the other members of the community in which that person resides. Decisions to withdraw are more a function of what occurs after entry than of what precedes it. They are reflections of the dynamic nature of the social and intellectual life of the communities housed in the institution, in particular of the daily interaction occurring among its members. Student departure may serve as a barometer of the social and intellectual health of institutional life as much as of students' experiences in the institution.
Nationally, high rates of student attrition among first-year college students continue to be a trend. Tinto identified 4 significant factors in student attrition. Many students feel socially isolated on campus. Students have difficulty in adjusting to the new environment. Students suffered from incongruence since they are not able to link the knowledge received from class lectures to what they already understand. And students have trouble in the college environment. In a revision to his factors, he added financial difficulty as another challenge to persistence. The SI program can be part of a broad institutional response to help address these factors. The SI review sessions provide a safe environment within which students can discuss and process the course material with others. SI students become acquainted with one another as they interact. The SI leader facilitates the discussion so that students can adjust, discuss what they do not understand, and discover strategies that unlock the mystery of learning at college. SI participants experience more academic success in target courses than their non-participating peers. A key concept in Tinto's model is that the departure decision for a student is more heavily influenced by experiences with the college environment than by the previous academic and social experiences that occurred before college attendance. The institution has an opportunity to manipulate its environment to provide, through informal and formal contacts, an opportunity for the student to be integrated into the social and academic dimensions of the institution. Rather than remain powerless in the face of high attrition, the institution can decide to make available resources and to change its campus environment. SI is a viable and effective option for changing the campus environment. Through SI, students become less isolated and are helped in assimilating into the culture of the institution, both academically and socially.
So far we have heard quite a bit about educational theories. What helped guide the SI model in the way that it was positioned within the college?
Dr. Ruth Kiemig in 1983 developed a hierarchy of learning improvement programs, by which programs were differentiated on the basis of 2 criteria: the comprehensiveness of the program and the degree to which the program was institutionalized into the overall academic delivery system. Highly ranked programs were not isolated, but were integrated into the heart of the institution. From lowest to highest, the 4 levels of programs in Kiemig's hierarchy were: isolated courses in remedial skills, tutorial assistance to individual students, course-related supplementary learning activities, and college courses that have been significantly changed and have comprehensive learning systems built into them. Remedial courses were rated lowest by Kiemig since they often taught academic skills in isolation from actual course content. It was very difficult for students to transfer successfully the skills necessary to succeed from the remedial course to other college-level courses. Students soon reverted back to their old habits. In some cases, the exit competencies required in the remedial courses were not as high as the entry-level prerequisites for the introductory-level college courses. In terms of long-term effectiveness, tutoring was also rated near the bottom of the academic support hierarchy. Kiemig found 4 major disadvantages with individual tutoring. First, because of its drop-in nature, it lacked systematic activity. Second, tutoring failed to provide enough assistance soon enough to make a difference. Third, the assistance was too late since it generally came after academic difficulty or failure has been experienced. And lastly, the students who needed tutoring the most generally used it the least. Using Kiemig's model, programs similar to SI were ranked near the top of the effectiveness scale since, based on Kiemig's statement, quote,
"Students' learning needs are presented as being necessary, because of the nature of the objectives and content of the course, rather than because of students' deficiencies. Therefore, all students have access to supplementary, instructional experiences which benefit non-remedial students as well.
The key to program success is the link between academic services and specific courses. Kiemig's description of the highest level of program in her hierarchy, the comprehensive learning system, was reserved for classes where the professor has made significant changes in her instructional delivery. The student's overall developmental needs are provided for, including interpersonal and affective needs and cognitive and requisite skills. The instructor monitors students' responses, including learning, and adjusts teaching strategies and learning experiences individually. It should be noted, however, that some institutions such as Salem State University have introduced SI through faculty development grants. Because the SI leaders and the course professors worked closely together as a team to meet student needs, the SI program at Salem State would meet Kiemig's highest level. The SI program, as it is usually implemented, complements the professor's instructional style and requires no change by the professor in the way the instructional material is initially delivered. Most professors would not choose to modify their courses to fit the criteria for Kiemig's Level 4 designation. Therefore, SI is able to fit the criteria for the highest-rated type program that does not require professors to change their instructional style. Using SI to facilitate faculty development, however, appears to be a growing trend within institutions not only here in the United States, but in other countries also.
Dr. Kiemig's model was certainly helpful in positioning the SI model within the institution. What educational theory could help students to think differently once they arrived at those SI sessions?
An emerging area of research is the field of metacognition. This field is concerned about the awareness of learners as they participate in the act of learning. A leading researcher in this area is Dr. Claire Weinstein. In her research, Dr. Claire Weinstein and some of her colleagues have identified variables that separate expert and novice learners. Experts know more. Knowledge held by experts is better organized and more integrated. Experts have more effective and more efficient strategies for accessing and using their knowledge. Experts seem to have different motivations for acquiring and using their knowledge, and experts evidence more self-regulation in both the acquisition and application of their expertise. Weinstein has identified 4 kinds of knowledge that expert learners need. Knowledge about themselves as learners, e.g., their cognitive characteristics. Knowledge about the cognitive demands of the academic tasks. Knowledge of a wide variety of strategies, tactics, and study skills. And prior knowledge of the content material. Weinstein stated, quote,
Learning strategies are considered to be any behaviors or thoughts that facilitate encoding in such a way that knowledge integration and retrieval are enhanced. More specifically, these thoughts and behaviors constitute organized plans of action designed to achieve a goal. Examples of learning strategies include actively rehearsing, summarizing, paraphrasing, imaging, elaborating, and outlining.
SI leaders can play a valuable role in helping students move from the novice stage to the expert stage. Through a variety of activities, SI sessions provide constant feedback so that SI participants are aware of their comprehension level of the course material before major examinations. This gives them opportunities to correct and change study behaviors before the penalty of a low examination score. SI leaders can model and use a variety of learning strategies during the SI sessions. SI participants have the opportunity to practice these activities during the sessions before leaving the group to go back and use the strategies by themselves when they study alone. Since the SI leader has already taken the same class as the SI participants, the SI leader can share what kinds of cognitive demands will be required for the particular class that they are enrolled in. SI leaders can help students discover the links between prior content material, current material, and preview future course content. Weinstein states, quote,
An expert learner is a self-regulated learner. Self-regulated learning requires skill, it requires will, and it requires executive control.
SI sessions are designed to lead students to become independent learners.
Metacognitive theories provide ways to get students to think differently. What guidance was there for helping students to engage and work with one another during SI sessions?
The effectiveness of peer collaborative learning has been well researched and documented. Early theorists Dewey, Piaget, and Brunner provided clear direction that leads to the value of peer collaborative learning. Developmental psychologists carried on the early research, and recent research in college student development and retention lends further empirical support. Since its inception in 1973, the SI model relied on peer group learning, now described as collaborative learning. As Dr. Martha Maxwell noted in 1979, however, most of the research and work on collaborative learning had previously been conducted at the elementary and secondary school level. Its systematic introduction to post-secondary education and research on its effects in higher education settings only date from the 1970s. However, several researchers have documented its increasing influence in higher education in recent years. The success of Treisman in improving academic performance of non-Caucasian mathematics majors has generated widespread interest in his academic program that includes, as an important component, collaborative learning. When comparing students studying alone to those studying in groups, educators have found that group study results in higher levels of thought and increased retention of information. Schlepak in 1988 found that group work was very important for the persistence of women in the physical sciences. In addition to improved academic performance, it is generally believed that students enhance their self-esteem through collaborative learning. Considerable evidence shows a collaborative environment will elevate students' feelings of self-worth more than a competitive one. Students will not have an opportunity to increase their self-confidence if they do not have an opportunity to practice their skills. Traditional classrooms with a lecture-based format typically fail to provide an opportunity for peer group interactions. SI sessions provide a safe and non-threatening environment for students to clarify their understanding and practice newly learned skills. Mastery of content material leads toward increased self-confidence. Some researchers have suggested that collaborative groups provide a better learning environment for returning women students than traditional lecture-based classes. Other researchers cite the cognitive and affective domain increases with the support of peers for high-risk students. A program of supplemental instruction can be one component in a comprehensive plan to help change the campus climate for today's diverse student body.
This has been quite a journey through all these educational theories. I hope that I can keep them all straight within my mind.
I think that you can. Why don't you provide the conclusion to this publication?
I will do my best. It has been nearly 2 decades since supplemental instruction first appeared in higher education. After starting at the University of Missouri-Kansas City in 1973, it has been implemented at a variety of institutions across the U.S. and around the world. Borrowing ideas from developmental psychology, SI has attempted to encourage students to become actively involved in their own learning. By integrating appropriate study skill with the review of the course content, students begin to understand how to use the learning strategies they have heard about from teachers and advisors. As new educational theories and practices have surfaced, the SI model has been adapted to incorporate the best in educational research. With the increasing diversity of today's college students and the advent of alternative admission programs, the student body is continuing its evolution into a heterogeneous group reflective of American society. The popular and professional literature often carries articles decrying the poor academic preparation level of students and/or poor quality of teaching by classroom professors. Few solutions have been offered that work. From our point of view, the matter is moot. Many professors have tenure and colleges need all the students that they can recruit. Rather than blaming either of the two parties, strategies must be developed that allow for students to succeed while ensuring that academic standards are maintained, if not strengthened. SI, as one component, can help contribute to an overall institutional plan for student success. In addition to the primary benefit of helping students perform better academically, Collaborative learning groups provide an environment for students to work together. It is interesting to note that most jobs in the real world require teamwork and camaraderie to maximize both individual and group rewards. While education purports to prepare students for this world, traditional modes of instruction still encourage individualism and often discourage cooperation. While there must be a balance between individual and group work, students may be ill-prepared to fit into a multicultural work world if they have not learned the skills of collaboration and cooperation. Vincent Tinto said this most succinctly in 1990 on page 22 in a publication by Span, quote,
"One way of integrating all students is to make sure our learning communities are open communities. We must make sure that classrooms do not disenfranchise or isolate students by their structure or by their content. We have to be concerned about the classroom experience as a liberating, integrative experience for all, not just some, students. We also have to think about the ways in which the classroom experience can lead students to develop supportive, rather than competitive, peer relationships. That is, we must seek ways to integrate, not isolate, the academic and social experiences of students. To have one with the other is a mistake.